His generals called it a suicide mission. His enemies laughed, calling it a grave that would swallow an entire army alive. But the young king simply smiled a cold smile and marched straight into the jaws of death. It was the most reckless decision in ancient history, and that single act of madness birthed the first true empire of mankind in a single bloody night. The year is 1457 BC. The Nile flows calmly, unaware that the world is about to burn. For 2 decades, Egypt had slept in the golden cradle of peace under the rule of the great female pharaoh, Hatshepsut. Granaries were bursting with grain. Trade ships docked at Thebes, heavy with ivory and cedar. War was a distant memory, a story told by old men. But when Hatshepsut took her final breath, the silence broke. Her successor was Thutmose III. To the royal court, he was a ghost, a short, quiet young man who had spent his youth standing in the shadows of his stepmother. The world looked at him and saw not a king, but prey. Far to the north, the vultures began to circle. The king of Kadesh, a cunning and ruthless warlord, saw the power vacuum. He formed a massive coalition. From the coastal plains of Canaan to the deserts of Syria, 330 kings pledged their swords to him. Imagine that. 330 armies united by a single purpose: to tear Egypt apart. A message dripping with arrogance was sent to Thebes. Egypt is an old lion with no teeth. We will flood the borders, we will burn the temples, and we will rewrite history. Thutmose III received this news while his throne was barely warm. He did not panic. He did not send diplomats to beg for peace. History tells us his eyes lit up with a terrifying fire. He stood, drew his bronze khopesh, and spoke a sentence that would define his legacy. I do not go to defend my land, I go to hunt. The order was given. 10,000 men, from the elite Nubian archers to farmers who had never held a spear, marched north. Their destination, the fortress city of Megiddo. After 10 grueling days crossing the scorching Sinai desert, the Egyptian army arrived at the town of Yehem. Looming before them was the Carmel Ridge, a natural mountain wall protecting Megiddo. That night, inside the royal command tent, the fate of the ancient world hung by a thread. The air was thick with smoke and fear. Thutmose III stood over a map, surrounded by his veteran generals, men who had fought wars before he was born. Your Majesty, General Jehuti pleaded, his voice trembling. We have 2 roads to reach Megiddo, the northern road through Zefti and the southern road through Ta'anach. Both are wide, both are safe. Our chariots can deploy in formation. We can fight a proper battle. And the middle road? He asked, his finger tracing a thin, jagged crack on the map. The tent fell dead silent. That is the Aruna Pass, he whispered, as if speaking the name of a demon. That is not a road, sire. It is a trap. It is so narrow that horses must walk single file. Chariots must be dismantled and carried on backs. If the enemy waits at the exit, the army will be choked. The first man will die before the last man can even draw his sword. We will be slaughtered like cattle in a pen. Every rule of military logic screamed, do not go. But Thutmose III did not think like an old general. He thought like an apex predator. He stood up, his shadow looming large against the tent wall. He growled, "Those rebels are waiting for me on the wide roads. They think I will choose safety. They think I am a coward. If I take the detour, they will laugh at Pharaoh." He looked into the eyes of every man in the room. "I swear by Amun-Ra, I will take the Aruna Pass, and I will go first. I will lead the vanguard myself. Let those who love Egypt follow me. Let those who want to live take the detour." It was the greatest gamble in history.
Dawn broke. The march began. The Egyptian army entered the Aruna Pass. Imagine the claustrophobia. Vertical cliffs of limestone towered on both sides, blocking out the sun. The path was overgrown with thickets and jagged rocks. The air was stagnant, smelling of sweat and horse musk. Thutmose kept his oath. He rode his chariot of electrum, a dazzling alloy of gold and silver, right at the front. He was the tip of the spear, the first target for any ambush. For hours, the tension was suffocating. A single loose rock falling, a startled bird flying up, any sound could stop 1,000 hearts. Every soldier knew that if the enemy was up on those cliffs, they were dead men. They were walking through a tomb. But the king of Kadesh had made the mistake of the century. He was a man of tradition. He believed battles were fought on open plains. He had massed his entire army to block the north and south routes, leaving the Aruna Pass completely unguarded because he believed no sane commander would ever try it. He underestimated the madness of Thutmose. At 1 p.m., the impossible happened. Thutmose burst out of the canyon mouth. The blinding sun hit his face. Before him lay the Jezreel Valley, vast, green, and empty. And there, just a few miles away, stood the mighty fortress of Megiddo. It was peaceful, unprepared. The enemy army was miles away, guarding the wrong roads. Thutmose had just pulled an entire army out of the earth, appearing like a ghost right behind enemy lines. The shock was absolute. But the battle was not won yet. Thutmose did not rush. He waited. He waited for the very last man to exit the pass. He camped right under the nose of the enemy, letting them see the campfire of the doom that had arrived. The next morning, day 16 of the month of Pachon, the sun rose, turning the valley blood red. The Canaanite coalition, having realized their mistake, scrambled back to defend the city, but they were disorganized, terrified, and exhausted. Thutmose deployed his forces in a massive concave crescent. He stood on his golden chariot, shining like the sun god Re himself. "Attack!" The command shattered the morning air. 1,000 Egyptian chariots thundered down the slope. The sound was like a landslide. Bronze-rimmed wheels ground the earth. Composite bows sang their deadly song. The coalition forces shattered on impact. They had no morale. They were fighting a ghost that should have died in the mountains. Panic spread like wildfire. The line broke. Then the unthinkable happened. The kings of Kadesh, the proud warlords who threatened to burn Thebes, abandoned their armies. They jumped off their chariots, threw away their gold-plated armor, and ran for their lives toward the gates of Megiddo. Victory was right there. The gates of Megiddo were wide open to let the fleeing kings in. If the Egyptians charged now, they would sweep into the city, and the war would end before noon. But then, as the enemy kings fled, they left behind their camp. This was not a soldier's camp. It was a city of luxury. Tents made of purple silk, chests overflowing with gold cups, silver statues, and lapis lazuli. The Egyptian soldiers, mostly poor conscripts from the Nile Delta, had never seen such wealth. They stopped. "Gold! Look at the gold!" The cry went up. They dropped their swords. They stopped chasing the enemy to loot the tents. They fought each other for robes and jewelry.
The discipline of the army evaporated in a frenzy of greed. Thutmose screamed from his chariot, his face twisted in fury. "Do not stop! Take the city! If you take the city, all of this is yours!" But his voice was drowned out. The momentum died. That delay saved the enemy. The garrison commander inside Megiddo, seeing the Egyptians distracted, slammed the massive timber gates shut. He locked his own kings outside to save the city. What followed was a scene of humiliation that history has never forgotten. The fleeing kings of Canaan, the most powerful men in the East, found themselves locked out. They had to be hoisted up the sheer limestone walls by ropes made of tied-together clothes. Imagine the sight. Kings dangling in the air like sacks of grain, hauled up through windows, kicking and screaming, while the Egyptian soldiers below were too busy fighting over a silver chair to notice. The gates were sealed. The opportunity for a quick victory was gone. Thutmose rode among his looting soldiers. His eyes were cold. He did not execute them. He simply pointed at the closed gates and said, "You dropped the crown to pick up the dust. You traded a kingdom for a handful of silver. Now, pick up your shovels. We must dig." The siege began. It was not a battle of swords, but of starvation. Thutmose ordered the construction of a massive wooden wall completely encircling Megiddo. He named it the Cage for the Rebellious. It was a suffocating embrace. No one went in, no one came out. The seasons changed. Spring turned to the scorching heat of summer. Inside the city, Megiddo became a hell on earth. The grain stores emptied. They ate the horses. Then they boiled the leather of their saddles. Then they gnawed on tree bark. The cries of starving children pierced the night air louder than any war horn. Outside, the irony was cruel. The Egyptian army harvested the wheat fields of the enemy. They baked fresh bread daily. The smell of roasting meat wafted over the walls, a brutal psychological torture for the dying men inside. For 7 months the siege held. 7 months of slow, grinding death. Finally, pride could no longer fight hunger. The gates of Megiddo creaked open.
They did not march out as warriors. They crawled out as ghosts. The princes of Canaan, stripped of their armor, their bodies skeletal, emerged from the dust. They walked on all fours toward the throne of Pharaoh. They poured dust on their heads, the ancient sign of total submission, and begged for the breath of life. The Egyptian generals drew their swords. They whispered to Thutmose, "Kill them, Majesty. Cut off their heads. Make a pyramid of their skulls so the world will fear Egypt forever." It was the standard practice of the ancient world. But Thutmose III looked at the broken men at his feet. He looked at the ruined city. He realized a profound truth. If you cut off the head of a father, you create a son who hates you forever. He wanted an empire, not a graveyard. Thutmose III stood up. The valley fell silent. "I grant you your lives," he declared. "I grant you back your thrones. Go back to your cities and rule." The crowd gasped. Mercy for these rebels? "But," Thutmose continued, raising a finger, "your eldest sons will come with me. They will live in Thebes. They will eat at my table. They will learn to worship my gods." It was a stroke of genius. He took the future leaders of his enemies and raised them as Egyptians. He did not just conquer their land, he conquered their minds. When those boys grew up and returned to rule, they were loyal sons of the pharaoh.
The army returned to Thebes in a procession that stretched for miles. They carried 924 chariots, 2,000 horses, and the golden harvest of an entire region. Thutmose III walked into the temple of Karnak and offered it all to the god Amun. On the temple walls, he carved the story of the battle, not as a boast, but as a report. The annals of Thutmose III can still be seen today, a stone testament to his genius. Historians today call him the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, but perhaps Napoleon should be called the Thutmose of France. Because unlike Napoleon, Thutmose III never lost a battle. He took a kingdom that was afraid of its own shadow, and in one lifetime he transformed it into the world's first superpower. And it all began on that morning at the crossroads of Yehem, when a young man chose the narrow path that no one else dared to take. History, as it turns out, is not written by those who choose the safe road. It is written by those who walk into the darkness and bring back the light.